1 win and 4 losses in their previous 5 qualifying matches. In competitive matches since the 2022 World Cup, 4 wins, 5 losses, 3 draws. It's not often that we speak about a Brazil that has more losses than they do wins in a given period. This isn't the Brazil that we've come to know. Sure, under Tite, they also didn't resemble the Brazil of the 1998 to 2006 era, the Joga Bonito Brazil that conjures up images of Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, and Rivaldo. But under Tite, there is still a very dominant team within CONMEBOL. This current, watered-down version of Brazil has only managed to get 10 points from their opening 8 matches in World Cup qualifying, basically the halfway point of qualifying. And it's not just the points, but goals themselves.
I don't think this team has scored more than 1 goal per game, besides against like Bolivia. Everyone else, all other games, they haven't scored more than 1 goal.
That's definitely not the Brazil we've come to know. They currently sit in 5th, and thanks to the expansion of the World Cup, the top 6 teams do indeed automatically qualify. So they are safe. But again, this is Brazil that we're talking about. The expectation is always first in qualifying, or at the very least second to Argentina. At this time, they're 8 points behind the leaders Argentina, and have watched their rivals win 2 consecutive Copa America titles, one of them being won right at home in the Maracanã. On top of that, Brazil failed to qualify for the Olympics Under-23 tournament despite being the 2-time defending champions, and their failure to qualify came thanks to a loss to whom? Argentina. Sorry, this isn't an Argentina versus Brazil comparison video, but neither exists in a vacuum, right? They need to be mentioned, and Argentina will be brought up again later in the video when it comes to coaching. But hey, I'm Adrian, and the other voice you heard was Filippo Silva, a real-life Brazilian whom you may know as Tactical Manager on YouTube. He provides some invaluable depth of knowledge and insight on this topic of why Brazil are struggling. But enough of that. Let's get into this video and identify what's going wrong, where the crisis lies, and how despite all of this, Brazil will still likely be a contender for the World Cup should a couple of things happen.
Goza paraguayo, sufre Brasil, el mundo del fútbol está estupefacto.
Now, as mentioned, this qualifying cycle isn't going so well. Brazil with just 10 points from 8 matches is truly terrible, but their Copa America fortunes weren't great either. The same things that Brazil had been struggling with in their qualifying since Tite's departure are bleeding into competitive competitions as well. Brazil finished the group stage with 2 draws against Colombia and Costa Rica, and a win over Paraguay. They scored 4 against Paraguay, 4-1, drew Colombia 1-1, and 0-0 with Costa Rica. In their match against Uruguay, they failed to score once again and lost in the shootout. They were held goalless in 2 of their 4 matches, scoring more than 1 goal in just 1 of their 4 matches. And with the World Cup on the horizon, their struggles are making Brazilians more and more anxious. This feels like it should have been a blip, but their poor form has now stretched to about 2 years post-World Cup 2022. In the September international break, Brazil beat Ecuador 1-0 at home, and the second half wasn't pretty. Imagine a Brazilian team playing at home and not being the team on the front foot. That's what happened in the second half. A timid Brazil looking to hang on to their lead. I mean, you just can't picture that with Brazilian teams of the past, especially playing at home. They weren't playing in their own box by any means, but they were not playing expansively. Then, of course, they went away to Paraguay and they lost. The team that they smashed 4-1 in the Copa America just a couple of months earlier played the Uno reverse card on Brazil, got an early goal, and held on tight for the rest of the match. This is a far cry from the team that Tite was overlooking during the last qualifying campaign when it comes to both the attack and defense, isn't it?
Brazil has 9 goals scored in 8 games in World Cup qualifying, and they conceded 8. For context, in the last cycle, with similar players overall, but with Neymar too, Brazil scored 40 goals in 17 games, and they conceded 5.
Todo mundo vê, é nítido a falta que ele faz, todo mundo que está aqui também é consciente de que ele é a nossa estrela, nosso melhor jogador.
Neymar. You know, the funny thing about Neymar is that if you go to the assist rankings in this CONMEBOL World Cup qualifying cycle, he's still amongst the leaders. And the man hasn't played since October of 2023. Neymar always always showed up for his country. Even if he was in poor form for his club, he relished his opportunities to play for Brazil, and his goals and assist records for them are close to untouchable for much of the current crop. You get the feeling that he was taken for granted at times, right?
I think he's been underappreciated by the global game in general, right? When we talk about Neymar, I would never put him in the Messi, Ronaldo category simply because you look at the careers, it's not close. But when you talk about talent, I would argue he is the only player in that entire generation that you could put in the category of a Messi and Ronaldo. Didn't accomplish as much, didn't have the same maybe mentality as those two players, luck, and just maybe not as smart as those two players. But in terms of pure talent, raw talent, he's the only one we can put in that category, and we've seen it. I think people underestimated how much he was carrying Brazil over the years. I do think Brazil has enough quality to fight for a World Cup trophy with the right coach, with all players performing. But yes, Neymar was definitely underappreciated by multiple fans for multiple reasons, right? A little bit of his personality, but no, Neymar 100% is underappreciated, and in my opinion, overhated by the global game. And I think people don't really notice that until he's gone, until he got actually injured.
Now, Neymar hasn't retired from international duty, but he's had injury issues at the best of times, and now that he's 32 years old, they hit even harder, as this most recent ACL tear has. Neymar failed his medical testing recently, and the optimistic outlook is that he will be ready at the end of October, meaning a full calendar year will have passed since he was injured.
Why?
And so naturally, this has been a massive wake-up call for Brazil and what the team looks like without their leader and most creatively gifted player. There's more to their struggles than just Neymar's absence, but it plays a part and is worthy of exploring. So, who is his natural spiritual successor? Vinicius is on a great run in his career, with some even saying that he had a Ballon d'Or-worthy campaign last season, which is not a stretch by any means. However, his impact at the club level, which is great, is far above what he's been able to achieve with the national team. Vinicius looks a drastically different player when he plays for his country. In 35 appearances for Brazil, he has just 5 goals and 5 assists. Neymar had 5 goals after 8 appearances. Even with all of his injuries, the longest run Neymar went on without scoring for Brazil was 5 matches, and he still picked up 2 assists in that barren run. Now let's be clear here about something. I don't bring this up as a stick to beat Vinicius with. I bring this up because Vinicius is the most talented attacking player that Brazil has when Neymar isn't around. He's only 24. Crazy, eh? Guy's been around for so long that we forget how young he is still. But if he is to be the next talisman of the national team, we need to see a sharp uptick in his productivity. But Brazil's struggles aren't on him alone. That should go without saying. But some foolishly point to that. And suddenly, he's a scapegoat, which everyone loves to have.
Of course, when there's a problem in Brazil, people try to scapegoat specific players, right? You go back to the 2010 World Cup, it was all on Dunga, the coach, and Felipe Melo, the player. Each year, they'll point to like one or two, like the coach and one player. In this case, Dorival is a big problem. And then obviously Vinicius, he is supposed to be the star and he's not performing. So they're going to go and pick on him. And to be fair, he has a lot of blame because he isn't performing for the national team.
But Brazil are also shipping goals at times, especially in comparison to the last qualification cycle when they conceded just 5 goals in total.
Tite is not a coach that I'm a fan of, but he's very good in terms of like setting up the back line, the defense. He's been known in Brazil for that for multiple years, even called a retranqueiro in Brazil, which is like a soccer terrorist, essentially.
And some of the pieces that were stronger before aren't as strong as they used to be. A good defensive record isn't just down to the back line, where the fullbacks could be better, admittedly, but that's for a different video. But a good defensive record also involves the goalkeeper, and namely, the midfield as well. Incredibly important to provide cover for the back line.
Last cycle, Brazil had a very good Casemiro, which is not there right now, right? That plays a big role. Casemiro, in his prime, did a fantastic job protecting the back line. So I think the absence of a 6 that can truly protect the back line, André is not the level of a Casemiro, and he was playing there. Bruno Guimarães has been terrible for Brazil. As good as he is for Newcastle, he's been terrible for Brazil, or maybe terrible might be an over-exaggeration, but mediocre would be maybe the right word.
But when speaking of Brazilian football, there's a certain part of each squad that is almost always the weakness for them. It's not the goalkeeper, it's not the defenders or midfielders, and it's almost never the attackers, right? So instead, Let's do a little thought experiment here. This is exactly what Filippo and I did, actually, so join us. Ask yourself this question. Who is the most well-respected Brazilian manager that has had success at the club level?
None.
Outside of Brazil.
Well, outside of Brazil, none. Scolari went to Chelsea and failed. Vanderlei Luxemburgo had a shot with Real Madrid with the Galácticos era.
Yeah.
There ain't many, if any, right?
So I dove into the research, and the examples of Brazilian excellence at the coaching level in European club football isn't inspiring. Leonardo won a Coppa Italia with Inter in the short time that he was there before he moved into more directorial roles in European football. Ricardo Gomes won a few cups at PSG and Bordeaux. Other than that, though, Brazil's pretty skint when it comes to coaches excelling at the top level of club football in Europe. There's Thiago Motta, born Brazilian. He moved to Barcelona when he was just 17. He developed as a player in Spain, Italy, and France, and chose to represent Italy rather than Brazil at the international level. Upon retiring, he received his coaching badges in Europe, and at this point has spent more years of his life in Europe than he has in Brazil. Often when you look at the career of Brazilian coaches, you could create a top 20 list of the teams they've managed. I'm being a bit facetious, but they often have a long list of clubs they have coached. Look at Luxemburgo, whom Filippo mentioned. Or look at Scolari's list of teams he's coached. And finally, look at the current coach of the Brazilian national team, Dorival Junior. I mean, you need a scroll to list these teams out, my goodness. But anyway, Dorival Junior's longest tenure as a coach was just under 2 years, which is when he was with Santos from July 2015 to June of 2017. In fact, in his entire career as a coach, he has lasted more than 1 year just twice. That is absolutely incredible stuff and highlights two things: a lack of trust in him, and perhaps the biggest issue in Brazilian football.
Dorival Junior is a extremely mediocre coach, and it's been proven over the years in Brazil. He is the coach, by the way, that back in 2009 or 10, I can't remember the exact year, Neymar essentially told him to go F himself, and Dorival was fired after that in Santos. So that's the level of leadership you get from Dorival. And you saw it in the Copa America during the penalty shootout. He's trying to talk to the players. They're making their own they're circle and talking, and he's excluded from it. There's no leadership from the coach. This team needs a strong leader. Tite at least was a strong leader with all his other flaws of positional play, how the team would be pragmatic at times, and maybe some struggles with in-game management. Dorival struggles with all of that. So coaching is a massive issue. It's a massive issue in Brazil in general.
If you want an example of just how bad it is there, look to the arrivals of two coaches in Brazil, Jorge Jesus and Abel Ferreira.
I think one thing that changed the Brazilian culture in terms of foreign managers, it was probably actually a Portuguese coach a few years back. Jorge Jesus took over Flamengo, and he won everything with them, and he's adored by the Flamengo fans. And a little bit after, Palmeiras signed Abel Ferreira. So Jorge Jesus won everything, and then Abel Ferreira has been, I would argue, the most successful coach Palmeiras ever had. And then there was just this amount of foreign coaches coming to Brazil for the clubs, and all of them been extremely successful, right? The last two Brazilian league titles from Brazil were with Abel Ferreira. He won 2 Libertadores. Jorge Jesus, I think Fortaleza right now, that's been the big surprise of the season. They have a foreign coach too, and they're in second place, which is unheard of. If I'm not mistaken, Botafogo, that leads the league, also has a foreign coach. The top 3 teams in the league are foreign coaches. So that changed a little bit of the perspective of hey, maybe Brazilian coaches are not very good.
Jorge Jesus was in Brazil for about a year and won both the league and the Libertadores. Abel Ferreira is a titan in Brazil at this point, overseeing the development of young talents like Estevão and Endrick, winning 2 Libertadores, 2 league titles. He's been a revelation there. Both Jorge Jesus and Abel Ferreira didn't have incredible careers in Europe. As a Benfica supporter, I can back this up as someone who's watched Abel Ferreira's teams in Portugal before. Jesus' peak in Europe was with Benfica, making 2 Europa League finals in consecutive seasons, winning multiple league titles. Jorge Jesus and Abel Ferreira, we must respect everything that they have done outside of Europe, in South America and now in Saudi Arabia in Jorge Jesus' case. But their careers in Europe, I mean, it's not like Ancelotti and Guardiola showed up in Brazil, you know? Despite being very good coaches, these aren't guys who are at the top of the list of the top clubs in Europe. There's a reason why they went abroad. You know what I'm saying? Abel Ferreira went from Braga to PAOK in Greece to Palmeiras. That goes to show just how dire the coaching situation is in Brazil and sheds light upon some of the struggles at the international level. All of this despite still having a very talented pool of players to pull from.
You look player by player, how the players are playing for their clubs and where they play. Colombia, Uruguay, they don't have the amount of depth Brazil has. Sure, the starting 11 can match up pretty well, but they don't have the amount of talent Brazil has. But the gap is not that big anymore. It's definitely not that big. And these teams actually understand their weaknesses, their strengths. They try to get the best coaches possible. And then when it comes to that, they've shown in the Copa America, for example, recently, and in World Cup qualifying that it all matters. And they're playing better than Brazil.
Y Argentina se queda con su 16º título de Copa América.
Now, the team that we mentioned earlier, Argentina, is in the most bountiful run in their football history when it comes to silverware. They won the 2021 Copa America, the 2022 World Cup, and the 2024 Copa America, mirroring what Spain managed to achieve from 2008 to 2012. It's not as if Argentina's player pool is wildly superior to Brazil's. Not at all. Sure, Messi is an absolute difference maker.
Obviously, that plays a big role. Having Messi helps. But Argentina has good coaches. And you talked about Brazilian coaches being successful in Europe or abroad. Argentina, you can point to many coaches are like, this guy's good, man. So they know how to coach. Argentina's miles ahead of Brazil. It's not close. The worst Argentine coach is probably at the same level as the best Brazilian coach.
So now it becomes even more glaringly obvious as to why the Brazilian Federation seemingly put all of their eggs into Ancelotti's basket. They're desperate for him. And that basket smashed on the ground when Ancelotti renewed with Real Madrid.
I repeat here, I have a contract until 2024, and so I would like to stay in Real Madrid.
So where does Brazil go from here? If you ask Filippo, who is the officially designated Brazilian representative and holder of opinions of all Brazilians, at least when he joins me here on my channel, but the only hope for Brazil would be with a different coach. And he points to the 2002 qualification campaign for some similarities here.
Brazil started with Vanderlei Luxemburgo, and he got fired at some point in the cycle. Then they brought Emerson Leão somewhere in between the cycle. He got fired in the middle of the cycle. And then they got Scolari towards the end. And Brazil qualified to the World Cup in the last round. They had to beat like Venezuela at home, but they still needed the last round to qualify. So it wasn't a good World Cup qualifying. And Brazil went on to win the 2002 World Cup. So I wouldn't judge Brazil too much in regards to what's happening. I think there are players, there is quality in the Brazilian national team. And I'm hopeful that maybe for the 2026 World Cup, they'll maybe pull an Ancelotti out of nowhere, or maybe go for an Abel Ferreira from Palmeiras that is a cup guy that would change the way this team plays and go for the win.
He also noted that in order for Brazil to find success, they will need Neymar to be around as well. But on top of that, Filippo brought up a really interesting point of view when it comes to Brazil's overall performance, and something that we often forget about them. They haven't been all-conquering all the time in their history.
Brazil has struggled in the past. That's one thing people don't remember. They go through these cycles. So people will catch up, and then eventually Brazil has so much talent that you develop like a Rivaldo, Ronaldinho, Ronaldo in the same cycle, because Brazil won in 58, 62, lost 66, and won in 70, right? World Cup. That was like the Pele generation. And then Brazil didn't win a World Cup or even make it to a final till 1994. People don't think about that. So there were 24 years where Brazil was like semifinals, quarterfinals, not winning. So were they done? Was there not enough talent? Some argued the 82 team of Brazil is one of the most enjoyable teams to watch, but they lost to Italy. And then 94, they won the World Cup playing ugly. It was one of the ugliest Brazilian teams of all time. And then they went through a very strong generation of Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Rivaldo, Cafu, Roberto Carlos, and they won. And then I think Brazil goes through cycles, and you have some young players coming up. And I think once we get a coach that can win cups, that's why I mentioned Abel Ferreira, you have players that are coming up like Endrick, Estevão, André Santos. These guys are really good, and you put them with some of the veterans. I do think they will be contenders for the 2026 World Cup, but you do need to get a new coach. Dorival will not be enough. If Brazil gets a new coach, a strong leader, a professional, not Brazilian, because we don't have that, they are title contenders for the World Cup. And yes, they will need Neymar.
It's not a talent issue for Brazil. Even without Neymar involved, which would be a massive bonus if they had him, But this Brazilian team certainly has the players, except for maybe at fullback, to be challenging for the World Cup regularly. But as of now, Brazil provides the perfect case study of just how important coaching is in the game. The perfect antithesis to anyone who says that a coach's job is incredibly easy when they have a club or national team that's packed with talent. All right, guys. Thanks for watching this one, and thanks once again for Filippo for all of his help. He's great, wasn't he, folks? I mean, round of applause for Filippo. And as much as he appreciates you clapping for him while you watch this video at home or on the bus, he'd much prefer for you to check out his socials in the description below, including his YouTube channel, Tactical Manager. Beyond that, thanks again for watching, guys, and we'll see you very soon. Take care.